What's up? Welcome to
Hey, how are we
episode
doing?
two. Episode two of the podcast name pending.
Yeah, we'll land on
We're-
it someday. Maybe by episode five.
The Lino podcast. Uh, and
Deep cut reference.
we'll let the it's actually a double reference because Lino, right? Um,
I don't get that.
uh, uh, oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Liquid nitrogen, bro. Chemistry sponsorship pending. All right. So today we're talking about the Almanack of Naval Ravikant, as you saw in the thumbnail of the YouTube video. What do you think, Connor, for first impressions of the book?
I mean, I loved it, honestly. It just was like there's so much practical advice, and he's just so good at like distilling stuff into like just like the really core like essence of what they are. Like just the whole I love all the sections of it, but the business section where he has that tweet storm that it starts off with, and it's just like little building blocks that just build on each other, and they're just like so simple, but they're like so profound and like their impact, I guess. But I thought it was, I mean, I loved it. I thought it was awesome.
Yeah, the concept of the tweet storm I thought was super sick. I made a note when I was reading it, kind of thinking about like he basically had all this knowledge like building up, building up, building up, and I was almost thinking like a rapper, like it was like Illmatic, kind of like Nas's first album was his best because you just imagine him in like Queensbridge, like writing down a bunch of like bars and then like building such like a like surplus of just knowledge and then just unleashing it all on one album. That's how I kind of felt like because it's a book where it's not really Naval's book. It's like Eric Jorgenson or whatever, kind of like creating an almanac for Naval, right? Based
Yeah.
off of his like it's all his thoughts, but like kind of curated in that sense. And yeah, it's just like dense, man. It's like it's super nice. There's just I feel like it's a book you can keep going back to and like something that maybe didn't stand out to you stands out to you more. Or like yeah,
Yeah.
like the concept of like sutras almost in like classic Indian thinking, where like a sutra will just be like a very condensed version of it's basically a tweet, right? But a condensed version of knowledge. And then he kind of expounds upon it. So I thought it was sick.
Yeah. But yeah, I read it the first time back in March, and then I read it again on my honeymoon in July because I kind of like hadn't been in a rhythm with reading in between those two. So I was like just to get me back into it because it's like it's so accessible, and you just like you said, you just find new stuff every time. But yeah, I really liked how everything's like he distills so much stuff in like really basic elements. And I think he even says sometime in the book about how like if you can make it like an equation, like he tries to make things in equations, it's like the most like distilled, like simplified version of like how things are related. And I thought that's kind of a cool concept. But you've been kind of doing that with your Goodread reviews. You'll just put like 3 words. Like you'll kind of try to cut to the chase on it. Like it's your version of the tweets.
Um, Thanks for the shout out. Follow me on Goodreads.
that's that's my your social media like influencer platform is Goodreads.
It should be. You know what I'm saying? It's like Twitter, but for books. You know, like it's just it keeps it um it keeps it fresh. But I was gonna say about the review thing, the only reason I do that is I use Caliber, and I sync that with my Goodreads, and it doesn't work unless I have a review. The sync doesn't work. So a lot of times I'll just put the review in there so it syncs. But now I'm starting to change. And I think there's a real value to like having like a quick review after you're done. Like even maybe a little bit more than what I've done and then distill from there. But yeah, I think that concept of like the kind of sutra tweet mentality is dope because it kind of
Yeah.
condenses everything. So
It's
were
kind of
there
like I was gonna say time back to that I forget the girl's name, but the girl YouTube one that we talked about last week. she forced herself to make like a concise like statement, even if it's like kind of pushing it beyond what it really is. Like force yourself to make like a statement on it. And it's kind of like that, where it's like, yeah, obviously you're not going to capture everything in like a one sentence thing, but like force yourself to distill to that. It helps you kind of like memorize it more.
Totally. Speaking of like the sutras and the tweets, is there a specific one that kind of stands out to you or that you want to bring up? Um,
Um, yeah, I guess like the first one for me on the business side, like that first section was the concept of like points of leverage, and it basically being like you either have like a bunch of capital, like people who work for you, and then the two new forms of leverage being like media and code. And I've never like really thought about businesses in that like through that lens, but I think it's maybe the best distillation of like how how is a business like being built and how is it like functioning, and it always is tied to either they have like usually a combination of a bunch of people working for them, a bunch of capital, like like manufacturing plants or something, or their media, uh, and that's like infinitely reproducible slash like code that's like infinitely reproducible. But yeah, ever since I heard that and read that, I've been like every time I come across like an idea or like a different business, I kind of like view it through that lens. And I think that was like just a kind of a light bulb type moment for me.
Totally. Yeah, I totally agree with you in that one where it's the scaling, the concept of scaling, right? Like it just becomes way easier when you have virtual assets or virtual labor or any something that can like kind
Hmm.
of scale almost immediately without any additional like logistical challenges that you might have with labor or you might have with like a physical product, right? Like code and
And it's
media are
yeah,
super special.
he loves using the word like permissionless, like, and it's completely permissionless. Like, you don't have to convince people to work for you. You don't have to have like a bunch of capital up front to make more capital. Like if you have code, you just type it out and then like it's just like server size and stuff like that. Like it's very minimal. It's about as minimal as you can get.
It would make sense why he's super into crypto, right? Like that concept of permissionless or that concept of just like auto like reliable, right? Like just kind of like it works um at scale immediately without
Hmm.
having to jump through any hoops, right? Or having to like rely upon um supply chains, bureaucratic stuff, right? Like I think just like the removal of red tape, right? So it's like not only is it like easy to scale in terms of like the like physical kind of requirement, but also in terms of like the logistical and legal and just kind of stuff that maybe slows down putting a patent in or like doing
Yeah,
something like through the government or something like that. So it
yeah,
would make sense why you would be yeah, a fan of something like like blockchain as
yeah,
well, which he kind of alludes to.
yeah,
Um, let's see, for me, I had a few things, but um, yeah, the status games concept was one that I always go back to. I'm always thinking about in terms of like how you make your way through life. Are you trying to like build your own status or kind of self-serving like zero sum games where I win, you lose? Or are you trying to create kind of positive sum infinite games where I win, you win, and it kind of builds in a way that's less competitive? And I think for me, as someone who, you know, I've been very competitive my whole life, but recently have kind of found that that's like a very, not only like is it affects you as like a person, right? Like in terms of your mindset and stuff like that. I think it's exhausting, and I think it's
yeah.
something where um, we're kind of raised to think that way. and almost kind of programmed that way to be like, I win, you like every kind of
Yeah.
game is kind of created that way. And it's kind of nice to see him as someone who's so successful that you would expect him to maybe have a different ideology, to instead be really like, truthful in the sense that like I used to be really worried about all these things. They don't matter. Like you want to be focused on things that like benefit you and me, like in the sense of like not just myself building up my own kind of ego or my own like status or whatever. I thought that's really
Yeah.
cool. Because
Yeah.
you don't have to give
Yeah.
up, that like um you don't have to sacrifice almost like your soul in the in the process of achievement, right?
Yeah. He makes that point of like in the business section of the book, like there's there's a such thing as like ethical wealth gain. And he's like, you can't be like some if you are convinced that there's no ethical way of making money, then like you're never gonna make money. Uh and I think he kind of proves that out with that, the stuff he talks about with like the status gains and like, he's looking for it's not a pie, like it's a win-win type situations. But I thought that yeah, that was probably one of my bigger takeaways from that the happiness side of the book was that idea of the status games. And like you said, like the default game is like the status game and almost everything. Like so it's so easy to play into that, and then it's even easier to stick with that once you're in like a position like him, where like you have all the money and the status in order to win those status games if you wanted to. You have to be like pretty intentional to like step out of it. Um, so I thought that's really cool how you brought that up. Made me start thinking about stuff a lot differently. Like in my life, like one of the like a silly example, but is like I just can't convince myself to buy clothes anymore. Or it's like I will do it, but I like I know it's like a purely status game type thing. Like like my shirts are fine and stuff, but like I want that one because I think it looks cooler, and if it looks cooler, then like I look cooler, and then like so on and so forth. So like you start kind of analyzing stuff like that. Like, is this really actually moving the needle anywhere else other than just like a status thing? And it kind of makes you question a lot of the stuff that you did in the past.
Totally. Yeah, I have that same thing where it's like it can be something like material or even just like in conversation, like the subtle status games you kind of play about like like building yourself up. Yeah, to me it's like one-on-one with the just like concept of like ego or just yourself as an entity that needs to be like bolstered, right? Like you'll
Yeah.
have a conversation and feel kind of like the subtle urge to kind of talk about yourself in a way that like makes yourself seem better as opposed to is in line with the truth, right? So it's like
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of there's material manifestations, there's subtle manifestations, and it's just kind of like a concept I think about a lot in terms of just like because I do like playing games. I think you and I both, it's like I like the kind of game theory mentality. Like I like the
Hmm.
concept of play. I think there's a lot of value in like playing games and like seeing life as kind of a game for sure, but not at the expense of kind of your um ethics as you said or your kind of like
Yeah.
morality or your like to kind of have these principles of just like you know I'm gonna try as little as possible to play these status games and
Yeah.
evaluate like kind of like when I am. And so yeah, when you're buying clothes it's like am I going for this because I want to look dope and like be cool,
Yeah. And like there's nothing bad about wanting to look dope, but like if you're wanting to look dope in order for other people to think you look dope, that's when it gets
yeah,
iffy. But there's
yeah,
a you bringing up the point about like competition and like how there's value in playing games outside of like the competition point of it. Uh makes made a connection for me for the book Inner Game of Tennis. And it's kind of this book on coaching that's specifically about tennis, but like it's kind of more well known in like a lot of the coaching circles. Like Steve Kerr is a big proponent of it, and like a few other guys. But he's in that book, the author's like super big into the idea of like less instruction and like more like like the individual like getting feedback from the environment. Like I'm not telling you that's a good shot, that's a bad shot. It's like you're seeing where it goes, noticing that, and then like changing. But he makes like the point about how you want to connect like with what you're doing and not so with like the competition. And he kind of is like anti-competition in it a little bit, but he brings up the point is like there's value in seeing how good you can be just for the sake of like you're competing against yourself. Like you're trying to figure out what your upper limit is. And that's the competition you're playing, not against like anyone in particular. So it doesn't matter if like you beat this person or you lose to this person. You're kind of just like competing against yourself. Like, can I be a better tennis player than I was yesterday? I think that's from that book. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it is. But I kind of like that connection with the status games thing. Like there's still value in games and competition and stuff just for testing your limits, not necessarily for beating someone else.
Totally. Like the infinite project of yourself as opposed to the finite project of winning this game. Right.
Yeah.
I think I kind of think about that too. There's another book, sports related, called Zen Golf that kind of that I'm getting into. I haven't read it fully, but it alludes to this and like kind of applies the same Buddhist mentalities to golf in the sense of like I think golf's a perfect example of like a game where you can get kind of lost in the status of your handicap and like how well you're playing, like kind of like be really like comparative with other people
Yeah.
instead of being rooted in like just like yeah, improving like self improvement and like competing with yourself. I feel like there's nothing wrong with like competition if it's rooted in like a kind of positive sum infinite um basis, right?
Yeah.
But I think
And
that that's
golf's
not.
yeah. Golf's a tricky one because it's so, it's so quantifiable. It's like this is your score. Like
Yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah.
one better than this person, you're three worse than this person. So like that's a tricky one not to get comparative with.
Which is why it's like the perfect one to kind of challenge your um you know desire to play status games, right? Like if you can remain like connected to that infinite kind of game concept, even in the game like golf, then you really got a mastery over like that um potential to do that elsewhere in life, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's interesting you brought up like the two sides, right? Like it's funny because it's similar to like the story of like Buddha, right? Like Buddha was like he was a prince and he had like everything, and then that's when he decided to like kind of like um search for enlightenment in a sense. So it's kind of interesting to think about Naval, like he gets all this money and stuff like that, and I just imagine him like not fully satisfied, right? And then kind of like the second, it's like he finds success but not happiness, and then kind of like searches for or looks more for happiness and kind of realizes that um yeah, he didn't necessarily need success in the first place to kind of get all these principles that he has. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just thought that was kind of an interesting like parallel in that sense.
Yeah. He mentions that because he mentions like he was like, I forget if he says like 10 years ago, and obviously this is like an excerpt from a interview, so I don't know how long ago it was, but he mentions like, oh, like when I was at like rich after this, like if you asked me what my happiness level was at, I would say like a 3. And now he's like, I'm at like a 9 probably or something.
Yep,
And
happiness.
it's yeah. But it's
Page
funny because
81.
like you hear like, I just kind of thought about this. Like you always hear those anecdotes of like person gets successful, isn't happy, finds a way to be happy, and then realizes they never had to be successful in the first place to get there. And my like sinister kind of pessimistic view on it has always been, yeah, but like they always like maybe you need both. Like maybe like sure they weren't happy when they were successful, but then like they were able to figure out how to be happy because they were rich already and they had like the means to like not work and figure this stuff out. But my like more optimistic positive side is it's just like a more like statistical thing of like you're presented with all the cases. Like the only reason you know about this person is because they're rich and successful in the first place. So like there's probably equally as many people, if not more, that are super happy and never got successful. You just don't know about them because they're not famous people. So
Yep.
uh yeah, I do like buy into that. And like the more it feels like sometimes it feels disjointed to like do aim for things that specifically make yourself happier. It's almost like you're not doing it the right way. But I will say the more I've learned about like the science of happiness and like getting more into health and all that stuff over the past few years, I can definitely like confidently say I'm just like my baseline happiness is just generally higher and it fluctuates less for sure.
Totally. Yeah, like the concept of like happiness being a skill, right? Happiness is learned, I think is the title of that chapter where he mentions um like he went from a 2 out of 3 out of 3 out of 3 to like a 9 out of 10, right?
Mhm.
Um
Yeah.
and I think, yeah, it's true, right? Like most people, um like you can have a lot of priorities in life, and we're kind of trained to prioritize like work and success above everything else. Like our happiness is a price, like it is worth the price of success, for instance, or like it's worth it to like grind until um you achieve, and then you'll be happy, right? While reality, it's like the only currency we have is time. And so like if we spend our time working all the time and don't spend our time practicing the skill that is happiness, right? As he kind of alludes to, like it being something you learn. If you're not like, obviously the things that come to mind, like gratitude, um, uh, other skills that kind of have been shown to kind of cultivate happiness. Um, if you're not practicing those things, then you're going to be unhappy in a sense. If you um, kind of devote your time just entirely to working, for instance,
Yeah.
or to
Yeah.
or other habits or whatever.
Yeah, one thing I've kinda, like, started thinking to myself is, like, there's never an excuse, like, not to be happy, like, right now. There are very few like, I'm very, very lucky to have, like, a lot of, like, the basic necessities in life, like, taken care of. Like, if you there are very few, like, external things that are so detrimental that like can single-handedly like disrupt you from being happy. It'd be like, like you truly don't have enough money to like have a place to live or to like provide food or like your medical bills are just like sky high and you like just can't afford it. Or it'd be like something like mental health related or something like truly like medical related. But otherwise, like usually like a bad job or like, you know, this is an ideal or that's an ideal. I'm always just kind of like, yeah, like that might suck, but like I still have to be able to be like getting that new job isn't gonna be the thing that makes me happier. Like, oh, I have a commute right now. Like getting a job without a commute is gonna be the thing that makes me happier. Like if I can't, maybe it makes me a little bit happier, but if I can't be happy right now despite that stuff, then I'm probably not doing some of the other stuff right that's in my control.
Totally. And I think kind of what you're alluding to there a little bit is the fact that like it's like a choice in a sense, like you can in the moment, like just with presence, like almost kind of choose to be happy. And I think it's a mind it's like a mindfulness kind of practice in that sense. And that's why I think he kind of alludes a lot to meditation. For instance, in those examples you gave, if you're focused on the past or the future, right? Like especially
Mhm.
like those two, then you're planning or you're like anticipating something. You're not really present and you're not able to kind of appreciate the moment. And so yeah, I'd say a lot of people, when you are trying to like achieve, you have to kind of like exist outside of the present
Yeah.
moment and kind of be like really focused on what's going to happen. And you can't really stay rooted in that. But that's just a choice you're making to do that. It's hard. It's an unconscious choice, but it's a choice nonetheless. And it's like if you can train yourself to be aware of your choices, however subtle they may be, then you can kind of, as you said, kind of find happiness in every moment. So
Yeah,
yeah,
what's he makes a distinction at some point in the book, like he doesn't consider joy to be happiness. He considers like something else to be
yeah,
happiness.
yeah. The quote is, um, let's see.
Yeah, I should.
You'll notice when I say happiness, I mean peace. This is the advantage of having the digital book. I got you. Don't stress.
Okay, cool, cool.
You'll notice when I say
Yeah, I'm
happiness,
working physical here.
I mean peace. When a lot of people say happiness, they mean joy or bliss, but I'll take peace, right?
Yeah.
That's what I think you're kind of alluding to, and I feel the same way. Um, Whereas I think people kind of imagine height or like a heightened state being happiness, and this kind of alludes to the stoicism I think that you and I both kind of got as a core drive of this book as well. But it's like happiness is really more like the balance or like the non-reactivity, the kind of
Mhm.
peace, right? The yin yang kind of in the middle path that like deals with all oscillations with equanimity, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that's what's kind of like joy doesn't really express that as much as peace does in terms of what I think a lot of the things you and I read and also that we probably agree with kind of allude to that as well.
Yeah, I think that was that point, just the idea of like like the goal being like steadiness and like neutral, like not, you know, you don't want to necessarily get the highest highs and the lowest lows was one of my like bigger takeaways from the book. And it kind of like I don't know how you feel about this. The contradiction of that I see is like we've talked in the past, like after reading um How to Change Your Mind, like the value of like peak experiences. Like sometimes you have these like abnormally like super high experiences that can really like rapidly shift how you like see things and do things. And the same can happen with like dramatically negative experiences, how it's like has the power to like change your how you see things and how you do things like permanently. Um so there you have that idea of like there's a lot of value in these like peak experiences, but then at the same time, from like a day-to-day standpoint, like you should be valuing like the steadiness, like the equanimity type. So it's kind of hard to like, like find the right balance between those two.
Totally. It brings up a really good point. It's I almost feel like um the reason like you can almost have both in the sense of like can you take your equanimity with you on these peak experiences? Can you somehow bridge the gap between the peace and the peak, right? Um,
Mhm.
I think there's the like, and it's only by going on peak experiences that you realize you haven't bridged that gap, right?
Yeah.
Or like having these kind of experiences where you challenge your equanimity in that sense. Um, So, but I agree with you. There is like a dichotomy there, and I think it kind of boils down to like, yeah, that kind of even within the philosophy itself, there's no like way to like encapsulate it in like a single methodology in a sense,
Yeah.
right? Like I think they both have their value.
Yeah. I think of it like uh Andrew Huberman on the Huberman Lab podcast too had like a whole episode on dopamine and how that works. uh, and just how like every dopamine's like anytime you have like a rise in dopamine, you're not only gonna go back down to your baseline, but you like actually dip below your baseline. And he kind of like he gave some advice like don't stack a bunch of dopamine kind of inducing activities on top of each other, because then you're just going to have a deeper kind of crash and like dip below. And like with like using addictive drugs and stuff, that's how you like permanently lower your baseline. But I thought it was kind of an interesting comparison to what Naval was saying about like the value of like steadiness, that it kind of ties in with like the brain chemistry as well. Not coincidentally, but just like, doing too much, like trying to like have too many good things piled on top of each other, you're gonna have more of a negative effect than you would if you kind of like you keep it just like steady and like gradual, I guess.
Yeah. No, totally. Um, yeah, we gotta we'll have to do how to change the mind at some point, and we'll have to do some Huberman report card. Uh
Yeah.
I I I talk about Huberman way more than I listen to them.
Yeah, he's the man. Yeah.
He's the homie though. He's the homie for sure. Um, but yeah, it's an interesting like kind of dichotomy. Obviously, like um, I think even yeah, even as long as you're kind of like incorporating these practices, right? Like I think it just roots back to like the skill aspect of it, where
Yeah.
like it's feasible to like fully like I think bank in on peace, but then you kind of like retreat from society, right? Like you can be like full like he alludes to it a few times, right? Like you can be a monk, right? Like I feel like you can fully like bank in on just like finding peace, but then it's hard you have to challenge yourself to kind of do that within the confines of like reality, right? Like
Mhm.
um even in the financial thing, he kind of like alludes to the monk thing. This is one thing I wrote down that I thought was interesting. Um, like he talks about retirement, right? And like he says there's like a few ways to get there, right? Like it's like one way is to have so much money saved that you have passive income, right? That covers your burn rate. The second way is to just drive your burn rate down to zero and become a monk,
Yeah, yeah,
which I thought was hilarious because that's like kind of what
yeah,
I did when I first started traveling. I was just like living for like $300 a month, and then like even though I wasn't making much, like it didn't matter because like the burn rate was so low. And then
yeah,
the third way he says is to do something you love, because if you enjoy it so much, it's not about the money. So like, I think it's really interesting, kind of as it relates to happiness, where it's like there's a lot of ways to kind of go about it. Um, and the important thing is, yeah, like I think employing like not just getting committed maybe to just one way of like finding peace or happiness, right? And kind of
yeah.
being open. But I think the thing that all those things have in common is the presence, right? It's like
Mhm.
being not in the past and not in the future, right? Is being like in the present moment. And I think that's what peak experiences, that's where their value is they take someone that's like consciousness is like way too future oriented, way too past oriented, and like suffers like that's how you suffer from things like depression and like deep anxiety. It's like your depression, you're rooted in the past, right? And
Yeah,
it brings your mind in almost like a punch in the head back to the present moment. Um,
yeah.
so
Yeah, two thoughts on that. I know we're sub 5 minutes now, but yeah, like the whole FIRE movement, like financial independence, retire early, is the idea of bringing down your burn rate to like as close to zero as you can. And there'll be people who like live off of rice and beans for 8 years and try to retire by the time they're like 30 or whatever. But it's interesting. There's like I think like the two biggest ones are like Mad Fientist and Mr. Money Mustache are two like bloggers that did the fire thing. And I feel like I've read some of their articles, but they've both kind of uh anecdotally stated how they kind of wish like there was like so many great things about being retired, but they kind of wish they had prioritized their health like more while trying to get their burn rate down to zero. And like they said that probably would have been worth adding an extra, I don't know, like working a little bit longer in order to get happier in the short term. So I thought that was kind of an interesting point, uh, like how they found that like you got to value your health at an equal level. Like not having all that time is great, but if you're not feeling good physically, then it's like not nearly as valuable. But then also to like tie it all together with the present thing, he makes a few different comparisons, like being like a child at play type mindset, and just like being, fully immense, like fully immersed in like the present moment. Not and like it's kind of like the lack of expectations. Like you're not like expecting anything from what you're about to do. You're just kind of like diving in. And yeah, I just thought like yeah, everything you've been saying about like the value of being present, I think is kind of the best way of encapsulating the whole happiness section in like one kind of short, like what was the word that you're using for the Indian phrases again at the
Sutra.
beginning? Yeah, it's kind of like the suture for it. I think
Yeah.
I probably misused that word, but
Nah. It's chill. I don't even know what it means. It's basically a tweet, right? It's like a
yeah,
140 characters or less, like a condensed version.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I'm trying to think if I had any more. Do you have any
yeah.
parting words? Um,
Anything from the learning section that you're like, I mean, we only got 2 minutes left. Like, I
um,
thought he makes a bunch of emphasis on microeconomics. I think it's micro, not macro, but yeah, microeconomics, and a bunch of stuff on game theory,
yeah,
which like I've never like formally like learned like read a book on like game theory, but that got me excited about like that prospect of just like reading a bunch on game theory.
totally. Like the in terms of the game or just like making life kind of fun, right? Like as you said about the child play and like treating life as a game. The thing that I kind of like, what I got, minute 30. Yeah, I want like the when he talks about like if you work with somebody for 5 to 10 years and still enjoy working with them, then you trust them. Like the idea of like working with people that you trust. And like I thought about his entrepreneurial stuff. And like yeah, I thought that was a really interesting kind of idea that like in the startup world, how important it is to like trust your co-founder. So like obviously like Sean, my brother, has worked with Evan like their whole lives, and they kind of just have that innate like trust that makes like business things super easy. While like I
Yeah,
feel like in a lot of times in business, it's like you just don't like trust your coworkers, and it makes life like it makes things just take way longer. So it made me feel like if I ever did build a business, like we should build one, right? Or like build
yeah,
one with like
that'd be sick.
with friends, because it's like then you don't have to really stress about
Yeah,
like the like it just saves time, like having people you trust to build a relationship. And the reason I bring build a business is because like the equity piece, right? In terms of leverage, right? I feel that more and more where it's like I should be working more on stuff that I have a bigger equity stake in to be
yeah,
able to like benefit from the work you put in directly as opposed to just get paid for your time, right? And I think
yeah.
like I'm
I think we're
become yeah, we're at less than a minute.